What if the man who destroyed your daughter's life lived minutes away for nearly 5 decades, breathing the same air, shopping the same stores, waving at the same neighbors, while her family shattered in silence? In the summer of 1972, east of Bothell, Washington, a 20-year-old woman with dreams of nursing and a love for horses pedaled her white 10-speed bicycle toward a quiet stable and vanished into the trees. For 46 years, her killer didn't run. He didn't change his name or flee across state lines. He stayed right there in Snohomish County, raising a family, running a small ceramics business, living in plain sight within blocks of the dirt track where he left her dying. This is the story of Jody Gwynn Loomis, a cold case solved not by a dramatic chase, but by a tiny, almost invisible stain on a borrowed riding boot. A stain that waited 36 years for the right light, the right technology, and the right detective who refused to let her be forgotten. If stories of ordinary lives stolen and extraordinary persistence finally delivering justice keep you watching until the credits roll, subscribe now and join us. These are the cases that prove truth doesn't have an expiration date. August 23, 1972. A warm summer evening in rural Washington, where farms, isolated horse properties, and dark stretches of timber created pockets of silence so deep a scream could vanish among the trees. The area east of Bothell was still countryside then. Dirt roads, fruit stands, the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors, but vast wooded stretches hid dangers no one anticipated. Nearly half a century later, it would transform into suburbs of condos and chain stores, but on that day, it remained deceptively peaceful. Jody Gwynn Loomis was exactly the kind of young woman who made that world feel safe and alive. At 20 years old, just 5 feet 2 inches with blonde hair and bright blue eyes, Jody had a spirit that refused to look away from injustice. She once confronted hunters shooting pigeons in a field, scolding them directly before carrying a wounded bird home to nurse it back to health. She had painted a vibrant mural of running horses across her bedroom wall. Her horse, Saudi, boarded at a stable 6¼ miles from the family home on Waynesapt Road. Sometimes spelled Winesap Road was her joy. She couldn't keep him at the house, so she visited as often as possible. Studying to become a nurse, engaged to Jim Roberts, who had moved into the family home earlier that year, Jody had just celebrated her 20th birthday in June. She was full of plans, hope, and quiet determination. That afternoon, Jody made a choice she rarely did. Instead of waiting for her parents to drive her, she pulled on a summery crop top and jeans, borrowed her 12-year-old sister Jana's size 5½ St. Moritz riding boots with their thick waffle stomper soles, and hopped on her white 10-speed bicycle. Her mother, Rosemary, pressed a single dime into her hand. "Call home if you're going to be late." Jody promised she'd be back before dark and pedaled off. She stopped at neighbor Linda Hook's back door, knocking to see if Linda wanted to join her at the stable. Linda, busy packing boxes to move back to California, declined. She watched Jody's cute little face peek through the window one last time before the young woman rode away down Waynesapt Road. "I can see her," Linda would later say in court, her voice breaking nearly 50 years afterward. What none of them knew was that this ordinary ride would become a journey with no return. Jody headed east along the Bothell-Everett Highway, then turned onto Penny Creek Road, disappearing into the trees. About 3½ miles in, past the halfway point, a 14-year-old girl named Kenda Machoro, later Matura, selling apples at a family fruit stand near 164th Street SW, watched a young woman on a white bicycle pause at the intersection before turning east up the hill and vanishing. Kenda would return to the county courthouse every few years for the next 47 years, quietly asking if anyone had found the killer. Around 5:30 p.m., a young couple seeking privacy turned their dark blue Saab Sonnet down a secluded dirt track off Penny Creek Road. Walter Morris, 33, and his 18-year-old girlfriend Kathy Lanack weren't supposed to be there. A tree blocked the narrow path. Morris got out to move it. Just 15 feet beyond the log lay a young woman on her back in the dirt. Her clothing was disturbed, one boot untied, a wound visible above her right ear. She was still breathing but unresponsive, glasses askew, eyes open but vacant. There was no time for proper procedure. Morris lifted her gently into the passenger seat. Kathy cradled her head to keep her airway open and shielded her as they sped toward help. Jody never spoke again. She was pronounced dead on arrival at Stevens Memorial Hospital in Edmonds. No ID, no purse, just a young woman whose name the hospital staff didn't even know at first. The unspent dime her mother had given her was found at the scene. She never made that call home. Back on Waynes Apt Road, the Loomis family waited as shadows lengthened. The sun set. The phone stayed silent. When a detective finally knocked after dark, Rosemary Loomis collapsed the instant she heard the news. Her husband, John, lunged to catch her but couldn't. 12-year-old Jana stood in the hallway, watching both parents shatter simultaneously. "I don't remember much after that," Jana would later recall. "It's like everything went black." By morning, investigators faced a full crime scene with physical evidence, biological traces, A-22 caliber shell casing, and a devastated family whose ordinary evening had turned into nightmare. The investigation launched with urgency, but every promising trail would soon go cold. Suspects included Jody's fiancé Jim Roberts, who was cleared by his hospital shift alibi that very night. A local ranch owner whose behavior around Jody had raised eyebrows yielded no physical links. A tenant chopping wood nearby couldn't fully account for his time, but had no connection to the scene. Tips about the Reapers Roadmen biker gang bragging about A-22 pistol murder collapsed under ballistics testing. Even Ted Bundy, whose terror was beginning to spread across the Pacific Northwest by 1974, was considered. Jody's age, appearance, and blonde hair parted down the center matched some patterns, and the geography overlapped. But Bundy's modus operandi, luring women with ruses like a fake cast, using blunt force, getting victims into his car voluntarily, didn't fit. Jody was shot on a rural road while bicycling alone. Bundy was ruled out. One by one, leads died. The case froze. Jody's family refused to let her become a footnote. Her parents called the sheriff's office relentlessly. Jana Loomis Smith grew up carrying the weight, attending press conferences, keeping her sister's name alive. In 2008, 36 years later, she told a reporter with raw pain, "I want them to sweat. I want them to wonder if there is DNA that can solve the case." She was speaking to a killer who had no idea the net was slowly tightening. That same year, the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office created a deck of playing cards featuring 52 unsolved cases. Jody appeared on the 10 of Hearts, photos of her in riding gear beside Saudi and wearing her round tinted glasses. Civilian volunteer Chuck Wright carried her card in his wallet for a decade, writing about her in the Mill Creek Beacon. "Some cases just grab you," he said later. In 2005, Detective Jim Scharf reopened the oldest unsolved homicide in Snohomish County history. He expected dead ends. Instead, he found hope in preserved evidence from the 1972 autopsy. But disaster struck. Vaginal swabs, underwear, and the .22 bullet had vanished from storage, misplaced or mistakenly cleared during reorganizations. Flabbergasted, the team sent remaining items, Jody's shirt, bra, jeans, and both boots, to the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab. 3 years passed. In October 2008, a technician examining the left boot under new lighting and modern tools spotted a faint biological stain on the exterior heel, the very boot Jana had lent her sister, the one Jody was tying when attacked. Under the microscope, 25 spermatozoa. A partial DNA profile was extracted despite 36 years of degradation. It was uploaded to CODIS. No match. The killer had never been convicted of a qualifying offense that triggered DNA collection. Jody's father, John, died in March 2005, just weeks after Scharf reopened the file, never knowing the boot held the key. For the next decade, that genetic profile searched silently. The killer lived normally in Edmonds, unaware his biological signature was being checked daily against new entries. He thought he was safe. He had been for 46 years. In July 2018, Detective Scharf pivoted to forensic genealogy. Inspired by a success in a 1987 double homicide, he sent the profile to Parabon Nanolabs. Genealogist Deb Stone spent 58 intense hours over 3 days building family trees from partial matches on GEDmatch. The trail converged on Jacquetta and Albert Miller of Edmonds and their 6 sons. Background checks pointed to one, Terence Miller. He had a 1968 conviction for indecent exposure to a minor, driving up to a teenage girl in his company truck. It predated mandatory DNA laws, so he was never in CODIS. Now 76, retired after heavy equipment work from 1958 to 1995, he and his wife ran a ceramics business from their garage. He lived on 52nd Place West in Edmonds, blocks from 164th Street SW and the murder site. Surveillance revealed a chilling detail. An old copy of the Daily Herald on his table, headline about the very genealogy technique used on the 1987 case. Coincidence or warning? Detectives needed his DNA. They followed him to Tulalip Resort Casino. When he discarded a coffee cup, they recovered it. On September 6, 2018, the lab confirmed the match. Terence Miller, 30 years old at the time of the murder, had left his DNA on Jodi's left boot heel. The arrest came April 10, 2019, 75 days after Jodi's mother Rosemary, 91, passed away without knowing the killer's name. Miller was charged with first-degree premeditated murder. At trial, the defense attacked the DNA as contaminated junk science after decades of storage. The prosecution highlighted the 980 million to 1 match statistic and Miller's proximity and history. On November 9, 2020, while the jury deliberated, 78-year-old Terence Miller took his own life at home. The jury, unaware, returned a guilty verdict for first-degree murder. Judge David Kurtz upheld it in an extraordinary ruling, affirming guilt beyond reasonable doubt. Labels and symbols are important, he said, and how this case has ended does matter. Outside the courthouse, Jana Loomis Smith, now 60, held a portrait of her sister beside Saudi. She had lent those fateful boots as a 12-year-old. Both parents gone, but truth prevailed. Truth never dies, she said. They thought it was so old that we wouldn't be able to follow through. The bridle Jodi carried that day for Saudi was never found, perhaps the one loose thread. Terence Miller never fled. He simply hid in plain sight until science and persistence finally exposed him. Jodi was 20, full of compassion and dreams. Her final ride, that borrowed boot, the unspent dime, they remind us evil can hide nearby, but justice, however delayed, can still arrive. Her family waited 48 years. The community was shocked. A killer lived among them undetected for decades. What overlooked evidence in other cold cases waits for the right eyes? How many families still ache for answers hidden in storage rooms? Share your thoughts below. If this story of a young woman's stolen future and a detective's quiet determination moved you, subscribe. We have more stories where DNA rewrites history. Jodi Gwynne Loomis never made it to the stable that August evening in 1972, but her name, her courage, and the truth on that boot heel ride on. Never forget her. The dirt track off Penny Creek Road should have been empty that warm August afternoon in 1972. Instead, it became the last place 20-year-old Jodi Gwynne Loomis would ever breathe. A quiet, tree-lined path in rural Snohomish County, east of Bothell, Washington, miles from the family home on Waynes Apt Road, where her mother had pressed a single dime into her hand just hours earlier. How does a young woman with her whole life ahead, nursing school dreams, an engagement to Jim Roberts, and a beloved horse named Saudi waiting at the stable, end up dying alone in the dirt, one boot untied, while her killer simply drives home and continues living as if nothing happened? The answer stayed buried for 46 years, but one faint biological trace refused to stay silent. Imagine the final moments, the sun filtering through the trees around 5:30 p.m. on August 2003. Jodi pedaling her white 10-speed, blonde hair catching the light, round-tinted glasses on her face, wearing her sister Jana's size 5½ St. Moritz riding boots with their distinctive thick waffle stomper soles. She had already passed the family fruit stand where 14-year-old Kenda Mashoro watched her turn east up the hill. She was heading to see Saudi, carrying the horse bridle she would need for the ride. A routine trip she had made many times before. Except this time, someone was waiting. What kind of monster forces a compassionate 20-year-old off her bicycle in broad daylight? Jody wasn't the type to back down. The same young woman who once confronted hunters abusing pigeons and nursed a wounded bird back to health would have looked her attacker in the eye. A .22 caliber shot above her right ear, clothing disturbed. One boot partially untied, as if she had been stopped mid-action. She was still alive when Walter Morris, 33, and his 18-year-old girlfriend Kathy Lennox discovered her while seeking a private spot down that dirt track. Morris moved the blocking tree, saw her lying there, and the couple sprang into action. They lifted her gently into their dark blue Saab Sonnet. Kathy cradled her head, trying desperately to keep her airway open as they raced towards Stevens Memorial Hospital in Edmonds. Jody's eyes were open but empty. She never spoke. She was pronounced dead on arrival. The hospital staff didn't even know her name at first. Back home, the Loomis family's world was collapsing. Rosemary collapsed at the detective's words. John lunged too late to catch her. 12-year-old Jana stood frozen in the hallway watching her parents break. The unspent dime lay at the scene, a heartbreaking symbol of a promise to call home that was never kept. The investigation felt promising at first, but hope quickly turned to frustration. Detectives pursued every angle. Fiancé Jim Roberts was at work at the very hospital where Jody arrived, cleared within hours by ironclad colleagues. A local ranch owner whose odd behavior around Jody had been noticed yielded nothing. A nearby tenant chopping wood couldn't fully account for his afternoon but had no forensic ties. Tips about the Reaper's Roadmen biker gang bragging with a .22 pistol collapsed under ballistics. Even the emerging shadow of Ted Bundy was examined. Jody's age, looks, and hairstyle fit some patterns, and the Pacific Northwest geography overlapped. But Bundy's signature deceptions, lures, and blunt force methods didn't match a roadside shooting of a cyclist. One by one, leads evaporated. Within 2 years, the case went cold. Detectives moved on. The file gathered dust, yet the Loomis family never did. Rosemary and John called relentlessly. Jana grew up refusing to let her sister become a forgotten name. For decades, the biological evidence sat in storage like a sleeping witness. The 1972 autopsy had collected crucial traces, but by the time Detective Jim Scharf reopened the file in February 2005, the oldest unsolved homicide in Snohomish County, disaster struck. Vaginal swabs, underwear, and the fatal bullet had vanished, possibly misplaced during reorganizations or mistakenly cleared. The team was flabbergasted. All that remained were Jody's shirt, bra, jeans, and the pair of borrowed boots. Sent to the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab, they sat for 3 more years. Then, in October 2008, a technician turned Jody's left boot under a new angle of light, using equipment and methods unavailable in 1972. There, on the exterior heel, a faint stain almost invisible for 36 years. Under the microscope, 25 spermatozoa, a tiny biological signature from the man who attacked her. The boot Jana lent her sister, the one Jody was likely tying when stopped. A partial DNA profile was extracted despite degradation and uploaded to CODIS. No immediate hit. The killer had never been required to provide a sample. Jody's father, John Loomis, died in March 2005, just weeks after the file reopened, never knowing the boot held the key to his daughter's killer. For the next 10 years, that partial profile searched silently through the national database, day after day, as the killer lived his ordinary life in Edmonds. He worked heavy equipment for decades, retired, and with his wife ran Miller's Cove Ceramics from their garage. He sold pottery on weekends. He appeared on Facebook as a quiet retiree. No one suspected the 76-year-old living blocks from 164th Street SW and the Penny Creek Road turnoff. In July 2018, Detective Scharf made a pivotal decision: stop hunting the man directly and hunt his family instead. Forensic genealogy, proven in a 1987 double homicide, offered a new path. The boot stain profile went to Parabon Nanolabs in Virginia. Genealogist Deb Stone spent 58 grueling hours over 3 days building reverse family trees from partial GED match hits. Census records, marriage certificates, obituaries, and public trees converged on Jacquetta and Albert Miller of Edmonds and their 6 sons. 5 had clean backgrounds. 1 did not, Terence Miller, with a 1968 conviction for indecent exposure to a minor. He had pulled his company truck up to a teenage girl walking alone and acted inappropriately, admitting it when questioned. That offense predated DNA collection laws, keeping him out of CODIS. Now 76, he still lived in the area where he had worked and raised a family for decades. Surveillance brought an eerie discovery: an old Daily Herald newspaper on a table in his garage ceramics shop. The headline detailed the exact forensic genealogy technique used in another Snohomish County cold case. Coincidence, or a man monitoring how investigators were closing in on long-forgotten crimes? Detectives needed confirmatory DNA. They followed him to Tulalip Resort Casino north of Everett. When Terence Miller finished his coffee at a slot machine and discarded the cup, investigators recovered it. On September 6, 2018, the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab confirmed the match. The DNA on the coffee cup was identical to the spermatozoa on Jody's left boot heel. After 46 years, Terence Miller, 30 years old at the time of the murder, had been identified. The arrest came on April 10, 2019, but it was bittersweet. Jody's mother, Rosemary, 91, had passed away just 75 days earlier, on January 2005, 2019, never hearing the killer's name. Her husband, John, had died years earlier. Neither parent lived to see justice begin to unfold. Miller was charged with first-degree premeditated murder. He pleaded not guilty. His defense attacked the decades-old evidence chain and called the DNA contaminated junk science. The trial in 2020 laid bare the decades of pain. On November 9th, while the jury deliberated, 78-year-old Terence Miller took his own life at his home on 52nd Place West in Edmonds. The jury, unaware, returned a guilty verdict for first-degree murder. Judge David Kurtz upheld it in a rare ruling, affirming guilt beyond reasonable doubt despite the defendant's death. Labels and symbols are important, the judge stated, and how this case has ended does matter. Outside the Snohomish County Courthouse, Jana Loomis Smith, now 60, who had been 12 when she lent her sister those boots, held up a portrait of Jody smiling beside Saudi, the horse she never reached that day. Both parents gone, but the truth had finally emerged. "Truth never dies," Jana said. "They thought it was so old that we wouldn't be able to follow through with the truth." Detail still haunts. The horse bridle Jody carried that afternoon was never recovered. Did Miller keep it as a trophy? It remains the one thread never fully tied. Jody Gwynn Loomis was 20 years old, compassionate, determined, full of life and plans. Her final known actions: borrowing boots from her little sister, stopping at a neighbor's door, pausing at a fruit stand, pedaling toward a horse she loved. A young woman who confronted cruelty and helped the vulnerable, cut down on a quiet dirt road. Her killer lived minutes away the entire time, never running, just hiding in plain sight until science and relentless advocacy dragged him into the light. The community was shocked. A retiree selling ceramics from a white picket fence home had carried this secret for 46 years. How many other monsters walk among us undetected? What forgotten evidence in storage rooms across the country still waits for the right technician, the right light, the right genealogist? This case proves cold cases aren't truly cold. They're waiting for technology, for persistence, for families like the Loomises who refuse to let their loved ones fade. Jana waited decades. The truth finally answered. If this story of a stolen life, a hidden killer next door, and justice that arrived almost too late grips you, share it. Subscribe for more stories where DNA rewrites history and overlooked details deliver answers. Drop your thoughts below. What does this case say about safety in small communities? About never giving up on the lost? Jody never made it to the stable that day in 1972, but her legacy rides on in every cold case reopened, every boot re-examined, every family that demands truth. She was real. She mattered. And her story isn't over as long as we keep telling it. Stay tuned. The next investigation is already calling. Even after the DNA match confirmed Terence Miller as the man who ended Jody Gwynne Loomis's life on August 23, 1972, the horror of how close he had always been refused to fade. Miller lived in Edmonds, Washington, just blocks from 164th Street SW, the very road that led to the Penny Creek Road turnoff and the secluded dirt track where Walter Morris and Kathy Lenack found the 20-year-old dying in the dirt. For 46 years, he drove the same rural roads Jody once peddled, shopped in the same growing communities east of Bothell, and built a seemingly ordinary life while her family shattered. How does a killer blend so completely into the fabric of a place that the victim's own sister would pass nearby without ever suspecting? This case doesn't just solve a murder. It forces us to ask who else is hiding in plain sight. Terence Miller was 30 years old the day he crossed paths with Jody. By the time detectives identified him in 2018, he was a 76-year-old retiree who had spent decades operating heavy equipment across western Washington from 1958 until 1995. He and his wife of many years ran Miller's Cove, a small ceramics business out of their garage on 52nd Place West in Edmonds. Shelves of finished pieces, packing materials, the quiet clutter of weekends spent selling pottery. On Facebook, he appeared exactly as neighbors described him. Unremarkable, friendly enough. The kind of man you might wave to while walking your dog. A white picket fence sign advertised their business. Nothing about him screamed danger. Yet his 1968 conviction for indecent exposure to a minor, pulling his company truck alongside a teenage girl walking alone and engaging in inappropriate behavior, revealed a darker pattern that never escalated to DNA collection because the laws simply didn't exist yet. That single prior offense kept him invisible to CODIS for decades. The surveillance phase brought chills that still linger. Detectives noticed an old copy of the Daily Herald newspaper on a table in the ceramics area. The headline detailed the very forensic genealogy technique that had just identified Miller through distant relatives on GED match. Was it coincidence? As the defense later claimed, old papers kept for shredding and packing vases? Or was it evidence of a man quietly monitoring how cold cases were being reopened across Snohomish County, educating himself on the new tools closing in? The jury would have to weigh that. But for investigators, it added urgency. They needed confirmatory DNA before he sensed the net tightening. The coffee cup discarded at Tulalip Resort Casino north of Everett provided it. The lab match on September 6, 2018, was definitive. After nearly half a century, the spermatozoa on the heel of Jana's borrowed left boot had a name. The arrest on April 10, 2019, came too late for Jody's parents. Rosemary Loomis, 91, had passed on January 25, 2019, 75 days earlier, still waiting for answers after 46 years. John Loomis had died in March 2005, weeks after Detective Jim Scharf reopened the file, but before the boot stain was even fully processed. Neither parent lived to hear Terence Miller spoken in connection with their daughter. The pain of that timing weighs heavily. A mother who pressed a dime into her daughter's hand that final afternoon, hoping for a simple phone call, never got the justice she prayed for in her lifetime. Jana Loomis Smith carried the torch alone into her 60s, the 12-year-old who lent the fateful St. Moritz boots, now a woman standing outside courtrooms demanding her sister not be forgotten. The 2020 trial laid bare the decades of loss and the strength of the evidence. Prosecutors presented the 980 million to 1 statistical match from the degraded but unmistakable DNA on Jody's left boot heel. The proximity of Miller's home, his criminal history, and the eerie newspaper all painted a picture. The defense fought fiercely, arguing contamination after 36 years in storage, broken evidence chains across multiple agencies, and junk science. They claimed the stain could have transferred innocently or been mishandled. But the jury weighed the science, the timeline, and the unbearable human cost. While they deliberated on November 9, 2020, 78-year-old Terence Miller took his own life at his Edmonds home. The jury, unaware at the time, returned a guilty verdict for first-degree premeditated murder. In a rare and extraordinary hearing, Superior Court Judge David Kurtz upheld the conviction posthumously. "Labels and symbols are important," he told the courtroom, "and how this case has ended does matter." The defense moved to vacate, arguing the process was incomplete. The judge refused. Guilt had been proven beyond reasonable doubt. Outside the Snohomish County Courthouse, Jana stood holding a portrait of her big sister. Jody smiling beside Saudi, the horse she never reached that August afternoon. Jana had been 12 when everything changed. She was 60 when the verdict came in. Both parents gone, but the truth had finally broken through nearly 5 decades of silence. "Truth never dies," she said firmly. "They thought it was so old that we wouldn't be able to follow through with the truth. Terrence Miller didn't escape justice. He just ran out of places to hide." Her words carry the weight of every missed birthday, every empty holiday, every moment a family should have shared but couldn't. Haunting detail remains unresolved: the horse bridle Jody carried that day for Saudi. It was never found at the scene, along the roads, or in the woods. Investigators searched Miller's property, hoping for a trophy. It was never recovered. That single missing item feels like the last whisper from 1972, a thread that refuses to be tied. What else might still be hidden in attics or storage boxes across Edmonds and Bothell? Jody Gwynn Loomis was more than a cold case statistic. She was a 5 feet 2 inches young woman with blue eyes and a compassionate fire, confronting hunters, nursing wounded birds, painting horse murals on her bedroom wall, studying to be a nurse, engaged and excited about the future. Her final known actions that day paint an achingly normal picture: borrowing her little sister's boots, knocking on neighbor Linda Hook's door. "I can see her cute little face peeking in my back window, pausing at the fruit stand, pedaling east into the trees with a bridle for Saudi." A routine ride that should have ended with the joy of brushing her horse before riding home before dark. Instead, it ended in violence on a dirt track, her unspent dime left behind like a promise broken by evil. The community's shock after the arrest was palpable. A man they knew as Terry, the ceramics seller with the white picket fence, had lived among them with this secret for 46 years. Neighbors who waved at him, customers who bought his pottery, none suspected. It raises the chilling question: how many other predators walk quiet suburban streets, drive the same roads and hide in plain sight because no one has looked at the right evidence under the right light yet? Detective Jim Scharf's persistence, the lab technician who spotted the faint stain after 3 agencies missed it, genealogist Deb Stone's 58-hour deep dive, and Jana's decades of advocacy all converged to deliver answers. But the cost was immense. 2 parents died without closure. A sister carried unimaginable grief into adulthood. A young woman's dreams were erased in minutes. This case transformed how Snohomish County and beyond approach cold cases, showing that genealogy, advanced lighting, and relentless re-examination can succeed where 1970s methods failed. Yet it also exposes the fragility of evidence, the danger of complacency, and the long shadow one crime casts across generations. What does justice look like when the killer dies before the gavel falls? When parents never hear the name? When a bridle is never found? It looks like a courtroom affirmation of guilt, a sister's quiet strength holding her sister's photo, and communities waking up to the monsters who never left. It looks like refusing to let cases go cold. Jody was 20, full of life, compassion, and promise. Her murder on that quiet summer evening in 1972 didn't just take her, it stole pieces of everyone who loved her. But the stain on that left boot heel, preserved through 36 years of darkness, finally spoke. Truth waited. Truth won. If this story of hidden evil, family endurance, and science delivering long-delayed answers stays with you, share your thoughts below. Do you believe more killers are still living quietly nearby in unsolved cases? How can we better protect the vulnerable, like Jody? Subscribe. We're continuing to shine light into the coldest corners of true crime. The next case is already waiting. Jody never made it to Saudi that day. But through every reopened file, every re-examined boot, and every voice like Jan as she rides on. Never forgotten, never silent. Her story demands we keep looking,